How would you describe survival mode? So we're going to kick it right off. How would you describe survival mode?
This is such a good and challenging question. When I think about what survival mode is, I actually find myself thinking about survival versus thrival. So when we are thriving and we are in a state of well-being, we are safe to, or we feel safe to get our needs met and honor ourselves mentally, emotionally, spiritually, socially, physically. We're doing things because we want to and because they feel in alignment, not because we feel like we have to or should or need to, right? Survival mode to me is I'm doing this because I need to. Because if I don't feel safe or I don't feel, whatever it is that we are going for. Whereas when we're in thriving, we're not doing things because we have to or we should, or it's what other people are doing or what we're told to do. We are living in alignment with ourselves and really, again, doing things that feel resonant or feel aligned or feel like it's just pulling us in that direction because we want to go that way. So I think of I guess I think of survival mode as the absence of that or the lack of that, and when you're in a place of addiction, compulsion, things like that.
Hmm. As you spoke, I was like just nodding my head because I mean, that is true. I think there is this immense level of freedom that comes with thriving, particularly around being able to step into or our authenticity that is absent when we're surviving. And a lot of times when we're surviving, we really don't even know who we are. We're just showing
Yeah.
up
Yeah.
and just trying to figure it out. Like, let me just get through the next 60 seconds, please. And then
Right.
we'll get somewhere. So, yes, I totally understand. Welcome to Survival Mode Disrupted, the podcast for those who are done performing, done people pleasing, and done living life on autopilot. I'm your host, Letitia, the Survival Mode Disruptor, and this is where we create disruptive, unapologetic transformations for those who are ready to exit survival mode and reclaim their power. Every episode is your permission slip to burn the rule book, break the cycle, and finally build a life that feels like yours. So let's disrupt everything that's holding you back and start living life on your own terms. This is your trigger warning. This podcast is raw. It is real and it doesn't sugarcoat what it means to survive trauma, abuse, mental health battles, or even the aftermath of living in survival mode for too damn long. What you hear on Survival Mode Disrupted includes unfiltered stories, graphic details, and a vulnerable truth that may trigger some of the audience. Please prioritize your emotional safety. If something feels too heavy, pause, breathe, come back when you're ready, or not at all. Your healing is yours to honor. These episodes are based on lived experience, not therapy sessions or clinical advice. Listening does not replace mental health treatment or constitute a coach client relationship. If you're in crisis, please seek immediate help from a licensed professional or contact your local emergency services. This space is built with care, but it's also built for truth and built for disruption. Take what you need, leave the rest, and most of all, trust yourself. If this podcast speaks to your soul, you don't have to do this work alone. Feel free to join our free Facebook community for high achieving women ready to break cycles and heal out loud. Join us at Disrupting Survival Mode on Facebook, or grab the book that started this movement, Exiting Survival Mode, raw step by step guide to help you identify, release, and rebuild from the survival patterns that have been keeping you stuck. Hello, 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 and welcome back to another episode of Survival Mode Disrupted. I am your host, Letitia, the Survival Mode Disruptor, and today we have Lisa. So, Lisa, why don't you introduce yourself?
Hello. Hello, everyone. Thank you for having me. My name is Lisa Schlossberg. I am a trauma-informed emotional eating coach. I'm also a licensed social worker. I used to be a personal trainer. I have a yoga certification. So I have been doing some version of working with people in the, let's call it mind-body sphere for the last decade or so. My practice is dedicated to people who are struggling with food and eating and their weight. And so that is how I support people and what I do today. I always say I think the hardest question is like, introduce yourself, tell us who you are. Cause there's, those are the credentials, but there's so much more to it. And I think we'll get there. So I'll leave it at that for now.
Okay, well, hello and welcome to the show, Lisa. I'm super excited to have you here. So, tell us your story to and through survival
Mhm.
mode.
Yeah, so it really all started when I was younger. I was 5 years old. And I know that, specifically with this podcast, there is space to talk about the actual trauma that occurred. And I very much appreciate that. What I remember about being 5 years old was that the only thing I wanted more than a cat was a little sister. And when I found out that I was actually going to get a little sister, I felt like that was it. I was complete. I didn't need anything else, and I was never going to ask for anything else. And then my baby sister was born 3 months early, and then she passed away after a few months. And I was told, as were my parents, that after she was born, she was getting stronger and stronger and stronger and stronger, and she was getting better and better and better. And then all of a sudden, one day, that was it. That was the end of her life. And there was nothing more that they could do for her. And so at 5 years old, this was really confusing for me. And some of the things that I remember about it were that I never got to meet her. Everyone else in my family got to meet her. And I didn't. And so when she died, and my parents were absolutely distraught and depressed and moving through their own grief, as was my older sister, I remember thinking to myself some version of, you can't lose what you never had. And she never came home and you never met her. This is not your grief. This is their grief. This is a thing that happened to them, not to you. And that was the beginning of me completely disconnecting from myself and living in a state of denial and dissociation. And what I remember about it was every single time I thought about it, I thought about her, Rebecca, um, it hurt and it was really painful. And so I taught myself really early on that if I started thinking about her, to distract myself and do something else and avoid that entire internal conversation. And that was the beginning of me learning how to cope and manage that way. Was, if I don't like this thought and I don't like this feeling, I'm just going to get myself out of it. And I'm not going to talk about it, and I'm not going to think about it, and I'm not going to feel about it. And a lot of it at the time was driven by this mindset I had of, what good will it do? Me being angry is not going to bring her back. So why would I spend any time feeling feelings about it? And I kind of locked it away. And I lived the next many years of my life that way. If you asked me at any point in my childhood, I was fine. I was good. I was happy. And I didn't need anyone. I didn't need anyone. I didn't need anything. I was good. 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 And I really believed that story through and through. And at the same time, I was gaining more and more weight every year. By the time I was 17 years old, I was over 300 pounds because food and eating was my primary coping mechanism. I had no idea about that at the time. That wasn't on my radar. All I knew at the time was that my parents and doctors were really annoying about my weight and they kept trying to get me to go on diets and things like that. And nothing ever worked or lasted because I had no intention of giving up the one thing that made me feel better. And again, I had no awareness at the time. I was just so in denial of all of it. And I was completely dissociated from my body. So the fact that I was morbidly obese my whole childhood, it didn't it didn't feel like it mattered to me. It felt like my body belonged to someone else. I looked in the mirror and I felt like it was a foreign object. And so it didn't matter to me. It wasn't something I wanted to work on. And then again, kind of long story short, I was 17, I was 18. By the time I got to college, I finally started what feels like waking up because I had a lot of moments now where my body wouldn't fit in a lot of places that I went. So I needed an extender to sit on an airplane, and it was challenging and scary and very anxiety provoking for me to go anywhere where I had to sit in a booth or a chair, like a restaurant or a movie theater. My back always hurt. I had stress fractures in my feet. I was kicked off a roller coaster I didn't fit on. My body was really getting in the way. And I remember thinking to myself, I'm 17 years old. I can't live like this anymore. I deserve better. I want better. And most importantly, if this is going to change, it's in my hands. Like, no one can do this for me. And that was the beginning of me really thinking seriously about weight loss for the first time. And again, the long story short, I did what I was told to do, eat less, exercise more. I lost 150 pounds very quickly and in a very unhealthy, rapid way. I swung the pendulum from overeating to undereating. And I had no idea what I was doing. I was just following the rules. As an overweight kid my whole life, everyone said, eat less, exercise more. And I said, okay. And that's what I did. But no one ever taught me that you can eat too little and exercise too much. And so that's what ended up happening. And at the end of my weight loss, I was the least healthy and the least happy I'd ever been, but I was also in starvation mode. My body was fighting me to keep every pound it could on my body. I was freezing. I was malnourished. I was starving. I was cold. My hair was falling out. My body wasn't working. And I was very confused and I had no idea why. And this was really the beginning of waking up because then I started speaking with a nutritionist who explained to me that now I have to eat more and exercise less, which was so confusing to me and so shocking to me that I had arrived at this place. And that was the beginning of really struggling. I would eat more and then I would be completely out of control around food. And for about a year and a half, 2 years, I was doing the dieting thing, the yo-yo dieting thing, lose it, gain it, lose it, gain it, lose it, gain it. And I just kept gaining more and more and more weight. And I was really scared that I was going to put it all back on. And that is when I started doing research. And I started getting really curious about why is it they say 98% of people who lose weight on a diet gain it back plus some. But am I supposed to believe that we all just wake up one day and lose willpower? We just stop being disciplined? Like, it didn't make sense to me, the narrative that the culture was offering to answer this question. And so I started putting some things together and I started doing research because I wanted to know what was going on. I found the ACE study, the Adverse Childhood Experience study, that essentially connected for me that food and eating has everything to do with trauma and weight issues and eating disorders. I found the National Weight Control Registry that essentially says the people that keep the weight off never stop dieting. And at that point, I couldn't do that. And I also started exploring the mind body connection ultimately and learning from different experts and different approaches that what I needed to really focus on was taking care of myself holistically, my mental health, my emotional health. I started paying attention to my relationship with food and I started learning if I feel my feelings, I don't eat them. And if I eat my feelings, I don't feel them. And this is a way that I've kept myself numb and disconnected my whole life. And I started really experiencing what a lot of recovering addicts do when you stop drinking or smoking or whatever else, and all the feelings start coming up that you were using that to suppress. I was an emotional disaster. And it was very confusing for me because I grew up thinking I'm the strong one. I don't have feelings. therapy is stupid. All of that. And now I was like turning around, reaching out to my therapist, being like, I need help. And that was the beginning of ultimately, I would say, like the next chapter is learning how to listen to my body, eat when I'm hungry, stop when I'm full, sure, but also use other coping mechanisms, learning how to feel my feelings, learning how to feel safe in my body and things like that. And it's been now about 12 years since my weight loss, and I feel as though, I've in many ways have finally figured it out. It's not perfect. I am not perfect. My life doesn't look perfectly. And, I think about the version of me that existed at that point that was thinking about how do I maintain my weight loss without living with an eating disorder for my whole life. And that is what has happened. I've maintained my weight loss, but I don't track what I eat. I don't get on the scale. I live a life of so much peace and freedom and stability and safety in my body and around food that is why I do what I do and how I got here. So that is again the long story short that brings me here today.
Thank you so much for sharing. And as you were talking, I could relate to so much, right? Like I have had a yo-yo of a journey with my weight. At my heaviest, I was probably close to 400 pounds. And I had the awareness that a lot of what was happening was me escaping, right? Yeah, it was a lot of escaping in that relationship with food. And then also a lot of misinformation, right? Like I got a diagnosis, a health diagnosis quite early on in life, and I didn't have enough information to understand that it wasn't like anything more than a metabolic disorder. And because I didn't have enough information about how I needed to manage my hormones, how that my relationship with food throws hormones completely out of whack, it was definitely like this battle for
Yeah.
many, many years, just trying to figure it out. And while I'm still on that journey, like I think the pressure of losing weight is less significant because I think my focus isn't about the weight, it's about balance, right?
Mhm.
Understanding that this is a holistic journey. And if I'm out of whack in one aspect, then I can't expect other aspects of my life to be in balance because it's all connected. So it's about like really getting clarity on you. And whenever I talk about accident survival mode, I swear I say this sentence in every episode, but whenever I talk about accident survival mode, it's always starting with that awareness. And so many of us who battle with our relationships with food really don't even have an awareness that that is what is happening, right? Like I didn't recognize that when I was immensely stressed out, instead of taking a slice of pizza out of the box, I sat with the box in my lap. Like, and you just don't do that because it's a form of numbing. It's a form of just putting yourself in a space where you're not dealing with your emotions, like you said, like you're not dealing with the stress, or maybe you don't even have the tools to know how to do it, as you spoke about as well, right? So, yeah, like,
Yeah. Yeah. And thank
yeah,
you for sharing that. Yes, you get it.
absolutely. As you were telling your story, what really stood out to me was the level of awareness that you had. And oftentimes, I'm able to pinpoint when certain habits and patterns have happened and now have clarity on why that is. And I want to speak to that for a second. During your healing process, during that process of getting more awareness, right? Not only about yourself and how you're dealing with your emotions, but also getting more information about food relationships and what your body actually needs, eating more, exercising less, like, eat more protein, exercise that, but instead of cardio, focus on that weight training type stuff. You know, what I want to, now I'm completely off tangent, but I'll get back there. Okay, during your healing journey, as you became aware of what created the habits for you? No, no, no. Let me ask. I think the perfect question is, how did you become aware of that event around your sister's death triggered how you dealt with your emotional situations? Like, what did that process look like in your healing journey?
Yeah,
It
yeah.
took me a long
I
time to get there.
You got there, and I get it. And it's a great question. Yeah, I appreciate that. So, like I mentioned, my relationship with my sister's death for the majority of my childhood and teenage years was, even in the way that I used to talk about it, was my parents had a daughter. It took me years to even think about the fact that she was my sister. I was so disconnected from the idea that it had anything to do with me. And so it started with, truly, when I found the ACE study, because until that point, I thought what, you know, a lot of people do, which is, okay, I eat too much. All I have to do is eat less and exercise more, and then I'll get to the finish line and live happily ever after. And that's going to be the whole story. And I really thought that was what was going to happen. And so when I made it to the finish line of weight loss, and I was so unhappy and so unhealthy. And really, I mean, living with an eating disorder, it was every single thought I had throughout the day was about food and eating. And I had found myself becoming so compulsively obsessed with it in a way that felt, I used to say, it felt like my brain was infiltrated. Like it didn't feel like it was my own. It was so compulsive and out of control. And so when I started losing weight, gaining weight, losing weight, gaining weight, and putting the weight back on, and I started doing research again into, how does this work? Like, does anyone have this figured out? And I discovered the ACE study. That was the beginning of replacing the question, what's wrong with you? Why can't you just stop eating? With, what happened to you? And that's what the ACE study did in a lot of ways, revolutionizing things like addiction treatment, because we started to figure out it's not about what's going on with the adult here. Why can't you just stop drinking? Why can't you just stop smoking? Why can't you just change your behavior? And it started really showing us we have to look at the immediate environment that we were raised in. How did we feel growing up? What kind of stressors were there? And ultimately, how, why, when, and with whom did this become the primary way of coping? And I remember realizing at a certain point that at 5 years old, much like most 5 year olds, I did not have access to drugs and alcohol and gambling and cigarettes, but I did have access to food. And the way that it affects the brain and our emotions, it can function the same way. And so when I learned, I mean, it really took the research to put it in my face that I had a very real, quote unquote, big T, capital T trauma in my childhood. That then woke me up in some ways, because until that point, I didn't know what trauma really was. I thought my relationship toward trauma was, well, I've never been kidnapped or raped or, like all of the most horrible things that could happen. So trauma has nothing to do with me. That can't be my story. And then when I started learning more things about, trauma is not what happened to you, trauma is what happened inside of you. That's Dr. Gabor Mate. And also, importantly, for me and my own understanding of my own story, that trauma is not just what happened to you and what happened inside of you. Trauma is being alone in it. And when I started to reevaluate what it felt like for me as a kid, I was powerless. I was full of emotion that had no outlet. I had no support. No one was talking to me. I didn't go to therapy. I just locked it away and I was essentially allowed to do that. And so finding the connection between look at what happened in your childhood and how might that have something to do with the way that you learn to cope was eye opening. And it changed everything for me because that was like, oh, there was this thing at the time. I remember thinking, like, well, okay, there was this thing that happened to my family in my childhood. And that was the opening.
And that's so powerful. And what you said, I've heard so many times. The way trauma is categorized, particularly back then, it was it was, with, for lack of a better word, absolutely traumatic, right?
Right.
Like you said, kidnapping, sexual assault, like near murder. I mean,
Right.
if not, like life is good, get on with it, right? And I think having access to information now, having more access to information and really understanding the core of what trauma looks like. This is why I said this to you at the beginning of the, before we recorded, this is exactly why we have these conversations, is because a lot of people don't recognize that, first of all, they've been traumatized, and second of all, that they are operating from the residual impact of the trauma. And it
Absolutely.
shows up in our lives, no matter what it is, it shows up in our lives so uniformly when you really look at it. Like we all numb out in some way,
Mm-hmm.
whatever that vice looks like, right? We all disassociate in some way. And the relationships that we have, whether it with people or the avenues that keep us alive, whatever it may be, they become strained and unhealthy without us actually knowing it, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, so I appreciate, you get into that level of awareness, like, no, this is about what happened inside of me and how I learned to cope. Then gives you the opportunity to make change there. It gives you the opportunity to make shifts. And the second part of accident survival mode, I always talk about, is reprogramming, right? Being able to challenge the narratives, challenge the beliefs, challenge even our conditioning, right? Or our coping mechanisms, as you mentioned. And then third is a reinvention, being able to step beyond what we've known and how we have aligned our identity with a desire to survive. Whether we recognize we're surviving or not is really key.
Yes. All very well said. Agreed.
Yes, absolutely. So once you were able to get that better relationship, more so with your coping skills, were there changes in your relationships, not just with food?
Yeah, I wish more people talked about this. The connection, because I always say, like you just said, like we are in relationship with everything, whether we're conscious of it or not. So I had no awareness of my relationship with food, but it didn't mean that I was not in a relationship with food, right? It was just like I was
Mhm.
so disconnected from it. So I do find it fascinating to look at specifically the relationship with food through a relational lens and an attachment lens, because that is true for, I think, everyone who struggles with food and eating is it's serving some form of connection. And I mentioned this just the other day, Johan Hari's TED Talk, I really love where he shares the opposite of addiction is connection. The opposite of addiction is not recovery or sobriety or abstinence. The opposite of addiction is connection. And so, to answer your question, I used to consider myself, I was quite a lone wolf for the first few years of my healing. And I learned how to do a lot of things that would support my mind body system and my stress levels and learning how to cope with emotions. But I did a lot of things that allowed me to do those things alone. So, journaling, meditating, yoga, even breath work, going outside, spending time in nature, things like that, they were helping me feel more regulated, but I could do all of those things by myself. And there was then I feel as though there was like this next level of healing that came when I realized that I could not do this alone. And
Mhm.
that a lot of healing and ultimately, a lot of the relationship with food and healing comes down to safety. I mean, we're talking about survival mode. It's like getting out of survival mode means feeling safe in and with yourself, with your thoughts, with
Mhm.
your feelings, with your body. But also, we are social creatures. And so, safety has to extend also into the social context that we live in. We have to feel safe with other people. And so, when I started experiencing the healing value of being in safe, honest relationships where I could say, actually, I'm not fine. Actually, I'm not okay. Actually, I do need help. Actually, that didn't feel good. Actually, I'm sorry. Actually, can I have an apology? Right? Like all sorts of just showing up authentically and honestly. I could do that with myself for a while, but doing that with other people really changed things. And so I've noticed tremendous shifts, right? The way that I grew up, it was like, I don't have feelings, but I'll listen to all of yours. I'm a really good listener. I can give you really good advice, but like I essentially don't exist in my own experience. And now it's embodying authenticity in a social context, which is really scary and vulnerable and risky because not everyone likes that or not everyone is on board with that or agrees with that or all sorts of things can show up, but at the end of the day, it just feels safe to do that. And
Mhm.
I think that's a huge part of the healing journey that I would not have believed many years ago.
Going back to your definition of how survival mode is the absence of, right? When we're in survival mode, there is an absence of vulnerability and true vulnerability, and not, oh, where is me? Here
Right.
I am. Look
Right.
at what's going on. No, it's that the core of being able to communicate what you need, what you want, what's disappointed you. And it's easy to isolate. It's easy to create a vacuum around yourself as you're healing. And sometimes that is required early on. But the absence of triggers or the absence of things that can perhaps stall you through your own perception, right? Like, okay, well, I can't open up to this person because of how I'm going to be received, and then we stall ourselves. That all of that is required in order for us to heal completely.
Right.
So again, like this, if we're looking at the dichotomy of the absence of or the presence of, that vulnerability is so needed in our healing journey and in our thriving journey, right? Because vulnerability is part of who we are at the core, and we learn to stuff it. We learn to misplace it in spaces that don't help us to grow.
Very well said. Once again, thank you for that. Yeah, agreed.
Thank you, thank you. So, Lisa, I've really enjoyed this conversation. Tell us a bit more about how we can find you online and the work that you do with people.
Yeah, so I think the best place to find me is Instagram, Lisa.Schlossberg, Schlosberg. My website is outofthecave.health. If you want to learn more about working with me, you can explore the website. I have a podcast, the Out of the Cave podcast. I think there's over 150 episodes of that now. So if you are anyone struggling with overeating, undereating, mindless eating, emotional eating, all the kinds of disruptions and quote unquote disordered eating. I always put it in quotes because it's not a disorder, it's a very valid way of coping. Then I'm your girl. That's the work that we do. And it's really, you brought up the word holistic before: mental, emotional, spiritual, social, physical, environmental, physiological. We have to address all levels of our relationship with food if we want real sustainable healing. And that is what my program offers. So feel free to reach out to me, Lisa Schlossberg at Gmail. Anyone can be in touch. And if you have any questions, let me know.
Yeah, we'll make sure that information is in the show notes. But before we wrap it all up, one key takeaway for the audience to action.
Yeah, I think that the most important thing to me is that if you know you are an emotional eater or a stress eater and you're turning to food to feel better, you are not alone and you are not broken. It's not your fault. There is nothing wrong with you. You're not doing anything bad. And in the journey of healing, if you can take the first step of just releasing shame and judgment for using food as a coping mechanism and understanding that it really is brain science and it's the most normal human thing, that is a really huge step in the right direction because we can't get very far with judgment and shame along the way. So know that you are normal, you are human, you are not alone. And if you are looking for support, it does exist. And there is a lot of hope for healing.
There's hope for healing, guys. Lisa, thank you so much for your time on Survival Mode Disrupted. And audience, thank you for catching another episode. I just want to remind you, you were not built to break, but you damn sure were not built to just survive. Disrupt the cycle, reclaim your life, and thrive on your own terms. And I will see you next week. Once again, thank you for joining another episode of Survival Mode Disrupted, hosted by the Survival Mode Disruptor, Letitia. You didn't land here by accident. This conversation, it probably cracked something open on purpose. Because survival mode isn't just a phase, it's a pattern, an identity, a prison masked as strength. But here's the truth, you're not broken, you're just unfinished. So if something stirred in you today, don't ignore it, don't numb it, move with it. And I want to once again invite you to join Disrupting Survival Mode, the Facebook community where healing is loud and messy and real. I also want to invite you to buy my book, The Survival Mode Action Plan, because your breakthrough deserves a blueprint. And if you felt seen today, be sure to share this episode with someone who needs to hear it. Like, subscribe, and drop a review. That's how I amplify the voices that need to be heard. And remember, this isn't about fixing yourself. This is about finding yourself again beneath the rubble. Until next time, choose ease, choose power, choose you. This is Survival Mode Disrupted. Let's keep shaking shit up.